to your boy Zafir Big Z. And today we're reacting to how airlines decide which plane to use. This is a really interesting one. It's from Wendover Productions. He's done a few airline videos, and so potentially I might do more of those if people want me to. I am an airline dispatcher. I have over 7 years aviation/airline experience. I've worked everything from ramp to OCC to a gate agent. I don't claim to know everything about aviation in the airline industry, but I definitely know a little bit, so I can help teach and get people more informed. Let's go ahead and check this video out, guys. It's a Wendover video, so you know it's going to be good.
Why airlines fly which plane where is mostly demand. Big planes fly to big places, small planes fly to small places. But it's not all demand.
Roughly. Sometimes you can fly small planes to big places too. Just a lot of them.
An incredible, nearly endless array of factors dictate the rest of it. While each airline is unique in how it decides which aircraft to fly, as an example, United Airlines has 28 different aircraft variants. This is quite inefficient. You can tell it's inefficient.
Yes, that's incredibly inefficient. Just think about it from a maintenance perspective. Just not even like a crew resource perspective, but like from a maintenance perspective. Imagine having the maintenance supply chains for over 20 aircraft at all of your bases. That alone is a phenomenal amount of money. Not only are we training the maintenance crew and having them take type courses and get type ratings for the aircraft that they are going to be certified on, these maintainers, these maintenance professionals, but also taking them through that course, having the equipment there, having different sets of engines, right? Are they GEs? Are they Pratt & Whitneys? You know, are they Rolls Royces? That adds complication, and it just adds so much. Like in a maintenance planning aspect, it would be a nightmare.
Because low-cost airlines like Southwest and Ryanair streamline their fleet down to one aircraft type.
Which is how
each additional aircraft variant in a fleet adds very real cost through increased operational complexity.
Yeah.
Maintenance costs more, crewing is more complicated, even airport operations get less efficient.
Even just on the operation side, operation costs more. Now, imagine having to do different sim courses, different line and dock captains, right? Different sim instructors, different sims. Now you're doing, maybe you were only doing your Q400 guy, and your entire airline only had Q400s. So you go to Seattle to use the Horizon sim. Now you get a Boeing. Now you're going, I don't know where Boeing sims are, probably Seattle as well. I don't know. But like, now you're going to a different place. Let's hypothetically say New York. Now you're flying half your crew to New York. It's just so much more expensive down the line, yeah.
So each of United's 28 aircraft variants must somehow be justified. And perhaps the most convoluted justifications occur within the regionals, the very smallest aircraft in the airline's fleet. The composition of this subset is almost entirely dictated by Section 1C1 of United's fiercely negotiated collective bargaining agreement with the Airline Pilots Association, the union representing its pilots. This is what's referred to as the scope clause, and it essentially limits how much flying United can outsource to regional airlines.
And this is why he's going to get into it. I'm sure it is. He will. But this is why the new Embraer E2s failed tremendously in the United States, because it just does not fit in the CBA scope clause. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'm sure he'll bring it up. Maybe he won't bring it up. I'm actually not sure, but we'll see.
In the US, smaller aircraft are not technically operated by the major airlines whose name are
they're like SkyWest Regional and stuff like that
on the aircraft, United, Delta, and American. Rather, they're operated on their behalf by regional airlines like SkyWest, Envoy, and PSA. The unions don't love this because it's pretty overtly a way to circumvent the higher pay rates they've negotiated. The pilots and cabin crew at the regionals are typically either non-union or represented by weaker unions, while United, Delta, and American consistently have more bargaining power than with their own staff, since they can respond to cost increases at one regional by shifting flying to another. So this manifests in dramatically lower pay scales. A first-year captain at SkyWest, which flies United CRJ-200s, 550s, 700s, and E-175s, earns $141.40 per flight hour, whereas a first-year captain at United Mainline makes a minimum of $342.75 for that same flight hour. So
a lot of people are probably seeing that and they're like thinking, wow, these pilots are making crazy money. And to a degree, yes, I guess compared to the average person, if the average income's $50,000, maybe $55,000 USD, yes, they are making a lot more than that. But you got to remember, flight hours is not the same as the hours you work. So you could start at 7 in the morning and finish at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but you only clocked in 6, maybe even 5 flight hours, and you're thinking, well, that's not right. I work 7 to 4. Yeah, but just that all that time didn't mean you were necessarily in the air. And this is how a lot of to be fair, most pilots are salary based anyways, but like for flight attendants, it's per flight hour. Their doors open, doors close is what their salary is. Them showing up to the airport, getting prepped, getting ready means nothing. It's free, which is terrible, and that's why a lot of flight attendant unions are pushing and striking. Air Canada, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
To protect their pay, United's collective bargaining agreement, which is quite similar to Delta and American's, sets strict limits on how much flying the regionals can do. They're allowed unlimited flying on 37-seat turboprops, although
not a single airline in the United States flies that. So it's kind of irrelevant. Nobody does it anymore.
In practice, United hasn't flown turboprops since 2018. They're also allowed to operate as many 50-seat jets as they want, so long as the total does not exceed 90% of that of the mainline single-aisle fleet. In practice, this is effectively unlimited, as the 50-seat jet total has never come even close to that of the single-aisle fleet total. The most meaningful part of the scope clause is the next one. They can only fly up to 255 70 and 76-seat aircraft, of which no more than 153 can be 76 seats. Looking at United's fleet inventory, they fly exactly 255 70 and 76-seat aircraft. This creates some rather bizarre fleet complexity. For example, United flies 2 different versions of its E-175. One is outfitted with 76 seats, but of course the airline is limited in how many 76-seat aircraft it can operate, so they also fly a 70-seat variant. It removes a row and a half of economy seats and uses the space to give everyone in economy an extra inch of legroom and add this luggage locker in the back. But this is only the start of artificial disefficiency for the sake of fulfilling union requirements. You see, Embraer, the manufacturer of the E-175, has developed a second generation of the aircraft called the
Okay, so he is gonna talk about it. This is a very interesting story. I think for anybody who is not in aviation, it's pretty interesting.
E-175E2. This aircraft is quieter, more advanced, and dramatically more efficient thanks to its geared turbofan engines.
I will say in Canada, Porter Airlines, which is probably the 3rd biggest airline in Canada, they absolutely love this plane. I haven't flown in it, but I'd love to fly the new E2s. I would so love to fly. They look beautiful. See them every day. They're gorgeous little machines.
Fuel burn is an estimated 16 to 25% lower, but no US airline operates it. The problem is that the E2 variant has a max takeoff weight of 98,000 pounds, and that's 13,000 pounds over the limit the collective bargaining agreement scope clause imposes upon its 76-seat aircraft. But this goes yet further. One challenge of United's 50-seat jets, historically, is that they did not have first-class seats. They operated with an all-economy configuration. Premium cabins are the most profitable part of the plane, so this left a lot of money on the table. But the scope clause prevented the airline from adding more of the higher-capacity premium cabin-laden regional jets to their fleet, so rather, United worked with Bombardier to develop a brand new airplane, technically. It's called the CRJ-550, and physically, it's pretty much just a CRJ-700, but technically, according to the FAA, it is its own distinct aircraft model. What United and Bombardier essentially did was convert a 70-seat aircraft into one compliant with the union's 50-seat regulations. Of course, they had to reduce the seat count by 20, so they added 4 more first-class seats, 4 more Economy Plus seats, then reduced the economy count from 48 to just 20. With the leftover space, they added luggage lockers, preventing the typically frequent gate checking of bags due to the CRJ's limited overhead bin space. They also added a walk-up snack bar, as the plane now legally could and would be staffed by a single flight attendant, rather than the typical 2 on the CRJ 700, but they'd be tasked with much more work than on a typical 50-seat jet due to the inclusion.
I just see I'm telling you, being a flight attendant, my heart goes out to all my FAs out there. I don't know who's out there who's an FA. Like, this sucks. It sucks. Being the single FA on a flight of 50 people would be a nightmare. Like, actually a nightmare. I feel like, yeah. Respect. My heart goes out to them.
Of a first-class cabin requiring more personalized service. But there's still the maximum takeoff weight component of the scope clause. For a 50-seat jet, that was set to 65,000 pounds, but the CRJ 700 airframe is rated for 75,000. So for the CRJ 550, software artificially limits how much fuel it can take on to keep it under 65,000 pounds. So strangely, despite lighter passenger loads, the CRJ 550's range is lower than that of the heavier loaded CRJ 700, despite being physically outfitted with the exact same fuel tanks. Now, whereas on the one hand this increases United's per-seat operating costs, on the other hand it ups their competitiveness in smaller markets. Their other 50-seat jets are not popular among passengers. The CRJ 200 has even earned the nickname Satan's Chariot given its cramped conditions.
Nice.
So while costs might be higher, so too might profitability given the addition of first class and a generally improved passenger experience. So what's seen in practice is that the CRJ 200 and E145s fly to small, uncompetitive markets. In fact, they're the aircraft of choice for destinations where United has a monopoly, like Cheyenne, Wyoming, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Fort Dodge, Iowa. Meanwhile, the CRJ 550 is suited for the most competitive markets with low enough demand to only justify regional jet service. In particular, it's what United uses for many mid-size markets in the eastern half of the US where Delta and American also have a strong presence. So, while United might not necessarily be the largest carrier in St. Louis, for example, it has a decent shot at competing for the higher fare premium and business traveler market thanks to the CRJ 550. Meanwhile, the other regional jets, the CRJ 700 and E175, fill in the middle, serving as the aircraft of choice for small to mid-size markets with average passenger dynamics and demographics. But it's once one gets into these mid-size markets that aircraft choice gets more complicated. That's largely down to—
It always gets more complicated. I mean, to be fair, it's also not really... how do I say this? It's not really a strict rule. Like, they're always going to use a 550 on a route from Chicago to Dayton, Ohio, for example, because just out of operational requirements and availability. For example, you have 80 passengers. You want to throw them on aircraft that seats about 120. Right, the average ticket is the average amount of seats occupied are gonna be 80 to 90, let's say perhaps. So you put it on that, and so you typically have an aircraft that's about 100, 120 seats, and you're making money all day long, right? Because you're filling out over 70% of the seats. For some reason, you have a maintenance issue on that aircraft. You can no longer use it. You have to swap out not only tails, but you have to swap out a different set of equipment. Now you went from a jet that's 120 seats, and now you have to use like a Q400 that has 72 seats. And it just so happened that day they had 68 seats for bookings, and 67 showed up, one didn't. You're putting them on the queue, right? Just because that's the only plane you have available. You might even have to do 2 flights, but it's just the operational requirement, right? That other person who maybe might not have made the flight, or the other 10 people who might not have made the flight, let's say there was 80 bookings and it was sold out 72 seat Q4, they'll just have to get on the next flight. Maybe the next flight isn't oversold, right? To be fair, United, Delta, and American, I'm pretty sure, I don't quote me on it for sure, but I'm pretty sure they oversell their flights by at least 1 or 2 seats. Like, that is their policy. It's a pretty terrible policy, in my opinion, from a guest-facing perspective. Like, it's a horrendous policy. But I believe they do that. So, these people do just get rolled over at the end of the day. So that is the case. Like, out of operational requirement on a day-to-day basis, you might have to use a smaller aircraft or switch tails to a different equipment. It's not going to be perfect. Like, this isn't an ideal situation, is what Wendover is describing, right?
The all-important distinction of leisure versus business travel. You see, vacationers care first and foremost about price.
Yep.
Generalizing,
they're price sensitive, and business class people are time sensitive. They need to be somewhere right here, right now, and the price of that ticket is less than the price of the work that they're going to be doing at that specific time period, where people on vacation technically have all the time in the world because they're on vacation. They have time. So they're price sensitive because they don't have all the money, potentially. So it's a funny dichotomy that airlines have to play with both. They have to play with two completely diametrically opposed customer bases and make it work for both. It's actually a very fascinating thing when you really think about it.
just pick the cheapest reasonable itinerary between their origin and destination on the day they want to depart. Business travelers, meanwhile, care far more about timing.
Yeah.
They might have a meeting that ends at 2 p.m., then they want the fastest itinerary leaving soon after that.
Yep.
They would not even consider staying an extra night. They want to get home, and since their company is paying for it, they don't care how much it'll cost. That's why airlines like United go way out of their way to appeal to the business traveler crowd. Even if they're not the majority of passengers, they generate far more profit per passenger than the vacationers since they book close to departure, pay for premium cabins, and fly more frequently.
That's the funny, crazy thing is, like, because it's business, it's work. Sometimes you don't know you need to be in a place like you guys know Alfey, my brother. He's in I don't know if he said he's a project manager, and he has to go visit his project site sometimes. And sometimes they're quite planned months in advance, but other times it's not last minute, but kind of last minute. And you know, you're paying the price that you're paying, right? And a lot of business travelers are in that situation. I used to work for a smaller airline that would it was a charter airline. So they'd buy tickets on a scheduled operator to position pilots to operate flights out of other bases. Now, the thing is, we're booking those tickets very last minute, literally like the day before we're flying somebody out. So we're paying an astronomical price, but we need that pilot to be there at a very specific time to operate the flight because they're going to make us a lot of money operating that flight.
Them, the key is to offer a lot of frequencies to the destinations they're likely to fly to most, which goes on to dictate aircraft choice.
Yep.
The United routes of Chicago to Burlington, Vermont, and Newark to Pittsburgh have somewhat similar capacity. United operates 415 daily seats on the former and 556 on the latter, but there's not much business demand to and from Burlington. Not none, but the planes there are filled much more by people going on vacation, visiting family, attending a wedding, etc. Pittsburgh, meanwhile, has major hospitals, universities, corporate headquarters, and a burgeoning tech scene.
Duolingo's from Pittsburgh? I did not know that. That is actually fascinating. I would never have thought Duolingo was founded in Pittsburgh.
It's a major business travel origin and destination. So United takes a very different approach to serving these two destinations. Chicago to Burlington is served by a morning 737-800, a midday E-175, and an evening 737 MAX 9 each day. Pittsburgh to Newark, however, is served by 8 daily United flights on a mix of E-175s and CRJ-550s, allowing for flights up.
Also, and I'm sure he's going to get into it, the thing is, sometimes you're on a leg that is where people are, again, very price sensitive. So putting the most fuel efficient plane is the best outcome because you're saving the most money. Whereas a route, let's say Newark to Pittsburgh, where it's mostly business travelers who are willing to pay the upfront premium cost, you can fly very inefficient planes, but because they're paying so much money, it offsets the cost of the fuel burn, the extra fuel burn, right? And that's why you also see airlines also particularly have their most brand new, most efficient, fuel efficient aircraft on routes that are incredibly competitive because the margins are so low because they're trying to compete with like 4 or 5 other airlines to eke out more customers that they have to have the most efficient aircraft they can to even get a few cents on the dollar.
About every 2 hours throughout the day. It's a bigger destination, but it's served by smaller planes. Of course, the biggest determinant of whether a destination should be served by regional or mainline jets is just demand. And it's when one gets into that next category that the distinction between aircraft gets increasingly muddled. United's conventional A320 family aircraft serve pretty much the exact same role as its conventional 737 family aircraft. They're both core narrow-body aircraft with very similar capacity and performance stats. There are few meaningful differences between the Boeing and Airbus aircraft themselves that justify having both. The fact United has both has more to do with the practicalities of running an airline. Incorporating a new aircraft type into a fleet has some very real costs. An airline has to build a new pilot roster certified for the aircraft, they have to hire mechanics trained on the aircraft, they have to get their ground crews accustomed to its particularities. Therefore, if an airline only operates, say, A320 aircraft, Airbus will note that they really would prefer not to buy Boeing aircraft when it's time for a new order. Therefore, Airbus might think that it doesn't have to give them quite as much of a bargain to win the order. So a mixed fleet strengthens the airline's negotiating position. It also allows for the greatest level of flexibility, especially because aircraft make their way into fleets plenty.
Yes and no. I kind of want to push back on that just because if you look at Ryanair, for example, Ryanair is the largest operator. I believe I'm not sure if it's Southwest or Ryanair. One of the two are literally the largest operator of Boeing 737s in the world. They're probably 1 and 2. I don't know who's the first. But the amount of sway and influence that both of those airlines have over Boeing is phenomenal. It is tremendous. It's basically a good quarter of their entire consumer base is those two airlines. So yes, Boeing will bend the knee for Southwest or Ryanair if need be. They literally have. So Ryanair has its own specific 737 MAX 8. So most airlines, I'm pretty sure United has a small amount of 7. I think they have the smallest amount of 737s out of all the MAX variants. The 737 MAX 8 is the smallest in their variants, but Ryanair obviously operates the 737 MAX 8, but they have a very specific high-capacity version, which has an extra set of emergency exit rows, so they could fit a higher capacity because that's their low-cost model. So Boeing literally has a 737 MAX 8 200 specifically tailor-made just for Ryanair. That's how important a customer Ryanair is to Boeing. And trust me, I can't remember his name, but the CEO of Ryanair, he throws his word and his weight around a lot. And trust me, people at Boeing listen. I think he threatened to say if Comac has cheap enough planes and they're reliable enough, he'd buy them for Ryanair. I think, again, he was just trying to push at Boeing to give him a good deal. But, that's what I'm saying. I kind of gawk at that idea that, they're buying both to keep manufacturers on their toes. You could have an all Boeing fleet and then threaten to go to Airbus, and Boeing will listen to you. They won't ignore you. Trust me. If you're buying 300 of their planes, they're going to listen to you.
Of different ways. Beyond just new purchases, some aircraft are leased, some aircraft are bought secondhand, and with a mixed fleet, airlines can grow or shrink more on their own terms based on the market of the moment. That is also true. If a major A320-based airline
That's one of the things. See, I'm very mixed bag on the leasing, international leasing of aircraft. I think to have the leverage to sell in terms of downturns for airlines to sell their assets to make quick liquidity and have liquidity available in times of crisis, I think is very important. But I also understand the ability to upsize and down, upgauge and not upgauge, but upsize and downsize your fleet in a very quick, efficient way by having leased aircraft and canceling the leases or getting more orders from leasing companies. I understand that too, but I also feel like you definitely do need to have a certain percentage of your fleet owned by you in case of emergency, because those are assets you can sell and get liquidity for.
Went bankrupt and flooded the leasing market with supply, then having an A320 fleet allows an airline to grow at a lower cost. Although, while there's little distinction between how United uses its A320 family aircraft versus its 737 family ones, there is a distinction in operations between its conventional A320s and 737s versus the newer MAX and Neo generations. The 737 MAXs, for example, are about 15 to 20% more fuel efficient than the previous generation, so the airline deploys them predominantly on longer distance routes. After all, the longer the flight, the higher the proportion of cost attributable to fuel costs, and therefore the more savings to...
That is true. The airline I work for, like I said, they put them on really at least I've noticed this. They put them on really price sensitive routes. So flights that have a very high amount of the lowest, most basic fare. They'll use MAX 8s because, again, they're buying the cheapest ticket, and majority of the cabin is filled with passengers who have bought the cheapest ticket possible. So because of that, there's not a lot of margin for money, so you want to put the most fuel efficient plane, but also you want to put the most fuel efficient plane, like a MAX 8, on the longest routes possible because, again, as you said, the fuel burn becomes a much more considerable factor in terms of the flight per seat economics of it.
Be made from flying a more efficient aircraft. So a huge chunk of the MAX's flying is transcontinental flights, and it even serves a burgeoning niche role of flying even longer low-demand routes like the 7-hour flights from Anchorage to New York or New York to Funchal, Portugal.
Yep. The airline I do, we fly from Calgary to Keflavik in Iceland. Talk about niche, right? And flying from Calgary to Punta Cana in the Dominican. It's far. It is really far. We're talking 7-hour flight. We're stretching that thing to the limit.
Now, the logic would follow that just as the conventional 737s and A320s are more or less interchangeable, so too would the 737 MAXs with the A320 Neo family aircraft, Airbus's newer generation of narrow bodies. But so far, that's not quite the case. The A321neo is now United's second highest capacity narrow-body aircraft with 200 seats, and it's essentially...
The A321, yeah. But I feel like the A321 is a bit of a red herring in the sense that it's closer to a 7.5, like they have a 757 showing right now. It's more of a 757 replacement than it is a 737 competitor. So I feel like it's a bit of a misnomer.
Replacing its only larger single aisle, the 757-300. In recent years, the 757-300 has served just a few very particular high-demand purposes. Hub-to-hub flights, Hawaii routes, Florida routes, and the one daily flight from Denver to Washington.
I literally took this exact flight that he's mentioning, Denver to Washington.
National.
Yep, I took that exact flight. I flew Calgary to Denver on a 737 MAX 8, and then I flew from Denver to Washington Reagan National Airport in that 757 that he's mentioning. And man, I was in the last row. I was literally in the, I think it was 52nd row, right at the tail, baby. Oh my God, that was an experience. I want that again, man. That was actually an experience. I love that. I'm so glad I got to fly the 757. I'm so glad.
Hawaii routes, Florida routes, and the one daily flight from Denver to Washington National. That's DC's downtown airport, which has a perimeter rule typically restricting flights of this length, with limited exceptions, including this one daily flight. With each of these purposes, United wanted to deploy more capacity on the route, but not quite that of a wide-body aircraft, so the 757-300 was well suited. But the 757-300 is getting old.
Really old. I'm pretty sure they ended production in 2002, 2003.
The airline's youngest was built in 2003. The aircraft is no longer in production, and it's quite inefficient compared to newer...
It's so beautiful, though. It is such a gorgeous aircraft, man.
...generation aircraft. So the A321neo is essentially United's replacement for it. But in the long term, this new aircraft...
It's not... comparable the way he was talking, the way he was mentioning the A320 with the 737, especially if we're talking about the A321neo and the XLR and ULR version. I feel like it's not the comparison to do.
Role is expected to go well beyond that. You see, United's executives are of the belief that the US air traffic system will not grow in capacity anytime soon, particularly in and around its key hubs. Airports like Houston, Newark, and Chicago are stretched to their limits in terms of gates, runway, and air traffic control capacity, and there's not a whole lot of respite in sight. But of course, an aircraft only ever takes one gate, one landing slot, and one air traffic controller, no matter if it's a tiny CRJ-200 or a massive 777. So United's strategy for growing along with US air traffic demand is to simply make its aircraft larger, and the A321neo is a core part of that.
True, but that was also the assumption with the... I mean, once you get into much, much bigger scales, it kind of falls apart. Because, like, that was the assumption Airbus made when they made the A380, that we're going to be so much more... the future of aviation is slot restricted. And if that's the case, you just want to increase capacity. Like you said, one plane will only take one gate, one aircraft controller, one slot. So might as well go as big as possible, right? But obviously the A380 did not pan out the way Airbus assumed the aviation market would have went. So on larger scales, it doesn't pan out that way.
The airline has almost 200 on order from Airbus, and as these enter the fleet, they're dramatically pushing up the average capacity of the airline's narrow-body fleet. They also plan to incorporate A321XLRs, a longer-range variant, and outfit them with lie-flat premium cabin seats to replace the 757-200s, which...
Oh man, that would be amazing. I'd love to fly that, man. Oh my god.
Serve premium transcontinental and lower demand long-haul routes. The final category of predominantly domestic aircraft is a rather unique one. In fact, United is the only US airline with it. Essentially, the airline created a subfleet of 777-200 wide-body aircraft exclusively for domestic and international short-haul use. These 24 aircraft...
I believe Air Canada does this as well. They fly 777-200s from Toronto to Vancouver, and it's like a super high capacity 777 that they do this with, right? It's kind of that, again, Toronto Pearson and Vancouver International are very, very restricted for slots. Like if you live in Western Canada or you live in Vancouver and you work in aviation, you know goddamn well there's flow into Vancouver every damn day. It is impossible to not get a flow time into Vancouver because the ATC is so limited there. It's insane. It's the second busiest airport in the country. Like, what's going on, man?
Aircraft are ancient.
And by the way, this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been this way for years at this point.
The fleet even includes the oldest 777 still flying for any airline, N774UA, built in 1994. They're outfitted with an incredibly dense configuration of 336 economy seats devoid of seatback screens, plus 28 premium cabin seats, not even from the last generation of United lie-flat seats, but the one before that. In fact, these aircraft are so dense that they're actually the airline's highest capacity planes. That's to say, United simply does not care about the onboard experience on these wide bodies. While it might be deeply uncompetitive for...
Yeah, that's an understatement. Which is, it's aviation.
Long-haul flights, it's similar to the onboard experience of the narrow-body planes that typically do the same type of flying. After all, this 777 subfleet exclusively flies two types of routes. The first is super high-demand hub-to-hub routes like Denver to Chicago, Chicago to Los Angeles, or Los Angeles to DC. And the second is a small number of super high-demand leisure-focused destinations, Cancun, Las Vegas, and most notably, Hawaii. Now, much like this domestic 777 subfleet, United's international 767s are very, very old. Most were built around 25 years ago. This means they're some of the least fuel-efficient aircraft out there, and operating costs are therefore quite high, but there are some advantages to this. The value of a 25-year-old 767 is almost nothing in aircraft terms. These aircraft sell on the used market for single millions compared to hundreds of millions for new wide-bodies.
So it's dirt cheap to run, well, in terms of having them. So you could just have them come in and out of storage when you need to, just upgauge for capacity, like in the summertime.
So the opportunity or lease cost of their aircraft is super low, which means the airline doesn't have to worry as much about getting their money's worth. 767s are perfect for surge capacity. They fly a lot in the busy summer and a lot less in the lower demand winter.
Yeah, and non-existent in the shoulder seasons, right?
The fact that they sit idle doesn't matter much since they cost so little.
Yeah.
When they do fly, United predominantly deploys them on US East Coast to Europe flights since these are some of the shortest long-haul flights in their network and often have poor aircraft utilization compared to other long-haul routes, as aircraft fly overnight to Europe, sit around for a few hours, fly back to the US, then sit around even more until...
And that's the thing about aviation, at least as a business, you want to utilize those aircraft as much as possible. You want that plane in the air as much as possible. If it's on the ground, it ain't making money. If it's in the air, it's making money for you. And the thing about transatlantic aviation between North America and Europe is it's all overnight flying, which means you're hanging out. Well, to be fair, you're not hanging out that much depending on how you utilize those aircraft. At my airline, for example, we operate 787-9 Dreamliners. And for example, you'll fly from London at 8 o'clock at night. You'll get into London at noon. That plane's turning around at 2:15 and it's going back. And it's back into Calgary around 6 o'clock. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And it's turning around in 3 hours and heading straight back over the pond to the UK. So... is it sitting around for a very long time? Yes, if you're in maybe the East Coast, like he said. But even then, I don't feel like it's a phenomenally long time, depending on what time you're leaving and arriving.
Repeating. But the airline has also split its 767 fleet in two to capture even more revenue. This is their high J configuration. Essentially, it's a layout of the plane with a super high ratio of premium to non-premium seats. 46 business class, 22 premium economy, 43 economy plus, and 56 economy. That makes for a total capacity of just 167, less than the airline's narrow-body 737-900s. United therefore flies this configuration to destinations with the strongest premium demand: London, Nice, Zurich, Geneva, etc. Meanwhile, the traditional 767 configuration, with 18 fewer business class seats but 36 more overall, flies to destinations with more typical demand like Amsterdam, Dakar, Lima, and Rio. United appears to have had fantastic foresight when rolling out this configuration in 2019, as today, while overall international demand has more or less stagnated, premium demand is surging and other airlines are leaving revenue on the table by just not having enough business class seats.
See... I get it. And again, the premium class, everyone, I don't know why it is, but like, it feels like people's attitudes towards flying have changed in the sense that people really just want the luxury aspect and enjoy that. And it is true, but it makes me want, like, genuinely, it makes me wonder if that's going to last that long. Because I feel like there was a high tide era for low-cost carriers. It's going by the wayside now, but I wonder if maybe it'll come back. I don't know.
Now, the next category of aircraft, the 787, flies the other side of the spectrum of long-haul routes. The Dreamliner is extremely expensive to purchase or lease, but it's tremendously more fuel efficient, about 30% on a per-seat basis in a similar configuration. So, while the airline had to pay a lot to either purchase or lease the planes, it can make that back in fuel savings by just flying them a ton. That's why aircraft
Which is exactly what my airline does. We fly those things like dogs. We run them ragged. But it's such a well done, Again, I always tell people the 787 was the last great plane Boeing ever made. It truly was ahead of its time. It was ahead of the game. It predicted a market. It created a market. I'm telling you, it is a phenomenal aircraft. It's probably one of my favorite commercial aircrafts of all time. I have nothing but praise for the 787. It is the poster child of what long-haul travel is all about. Really, it's such a masterclass of an aircraft. I'm sorry, I can't praise it more. But yeah, we run them ragged. We run them like dogs. We basically run a 9 aircraft sched on 7 aircraft, 7 Dreamliners. That's how much we run them.
Is key. It's always tightly scheduled with just 2 or 3 hours between flights.
Yeah, like I was saying, at my airline, we run them 2 to 3 hour turns max.
And also flies the airline's very longest routes: DC to Cape Town, San Francisco to Singapore, Houston to Sydney. It also works as a solution to lower demand long-haul routes that are beyond the relatively short ideal operating range of the 767. San Francisco to Christchurch or DC to Lagos, for example. But what both the 767 and 787 are not great for is cargo. Cargo is responsible for a relatively modest portion of United's overall revenue, about 3%, but it can absolutely make or break the economics of individual long-haul routes. The 777, particularly its -300ER variant, is by far the highest capacity cargo hauler with room for 44 loading containers. For this reason, the aircraft is disproportionately deployed on the airline's Asian routes, where air cargo demand is highest. The airline currently serves Hong Kong 4 times a day, with 2 787 flights from Los Angeles and 2 777s from San Francisco, which likely is far more than they would if not for air cargo. The destination's demand has slowed since COVID, and to fill planes, United has to offer relatively low fares given the steep competition from Asian airlines. But Hong Kong is a major air cargo hub, sitting right next to China's manufacturing capital of Shenzhen, and that likely justifies its status as the airline's second highest capacity Asian destination after Tokyo.
Yeah,
Fleet selection is so core to an airline's business model that it almost single-handedly explains it. United's strategy is centered around the hybrid of domestic and global connectivity, with service to both small towns and far-flung capitals.
True.
That's different from, say, Emirates, which with its wide-body-only fleet is about connecting far-flung, high-demand destinations with little consideration for small markets. Then there's an airline like Ryanair with a massive 737-only fleet focused on reducing operating costs and only serving destinations that can support the cost-saving strategy it deploys. An airline's strategy is its fleet, and its fleet is its strategy.
Essentially, it really is that. Like it's a you could look at it as a chicken or an egg kind of scenario, but it's very accurate.
Now, I know when you're standing in the razor aisle at the grocery store, you probably think,
okay, I mean, I'm not sponsored by them, so I'm not going to give it credit where it's due. But that was a very informative video, very, very great, well done production from Wendover. He always does it fantastic. Hopefully I was able to give a little bit of insight and knowledge to pass on to you guys, and you enjoyed it and you were entertained. If you guys want to see more, please let me know. And hopefully you guys take care. I hope to see you soon.
Obsessed with you, you want the sex and only